Welcome to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe and hit the bell icon for new updates. He was the star of Fast and Furious and actor, a racer, a car lover. But there was one car Paul Walker never showed off, hidden away in a secret garage in a locked door. No one talked about his most personal project. The car had never finished. A car built not for Thecameras, but for something deeper. And when they finally looked inside, what they found changed everything. Before was a Hollywood action star. Paul Walker was a real car guy. Not Thecan that shows up for photos in a borrowed car, but a man who actually lived for speed, car design, and the hard-off machines. Born in Glendale, California, and raised around SoCal's car world, Paul grew up around people who fixed and raced cars. Long before he ever showed upon the big screen, he was already changing engines, going to track days, and diving deep into the underground car world. It wasn't just an act put on for the Fast and Furious movies. It was his real life. "I knew him personally often," said Paul Wasson of Us. A guy who'd show up to a car meet without warning in his favorite Skyline GTR and talk cars with anyone, famous or not. He wasn't about showing off wealth or bragging about fame. He truly loved machines. In fact, he famously kept over 30 rare, exotic, and classic cars, not in a fancy showroom, but in actual working shape. Some were changed up, some left original, but each was driven, loved, and handpicked by Paul himself. He raced in time trials and club events, pushing his cars to the limit not for headlines, but for the rush. Esther reach out worldwide at disaster, help charity, using his fame to help others. Even then, he was known to show up at events in dirty jeans, grease under his nails, having just come from the garage. Unlike many actors who played street racers, Paul Relly was one, and that's what made him different. It wasn't a character, it was part of who he was. Every gear shift, every line he said in Fast and Furious had the feeling of someone who really understood what it meant to touch his speed. But among all the Supras, Skylines, and Mustangs, there was one car he never shared with the public, a personal project, a secret build. And the history of that car begins only after Paul was gone. To most fans, Paul Walker's car collection was already legendary. After his death in 2013, news stories came out about the incredibly group of cars he had collected. 34 cars owned with his longtime friend, Roger Rouse. The list included Nissan Skyline GTRs, or EAL R34s, not movie props, Toyota Supras, Mustangs, a perfect BMW M1, and even a super rare Ford GT. Car lovers around the world went crazy over how awesome and tasteful the lineup was. This wasn't a collection built for show. It was chosen with passion, history, and speed in mind, according to some close to Paul. There was always talk of a car that didn't make those auction lists. A project car, not a purchase, but a build, something, was working on himself. Unlike the exotic cars and imports in climate-controlled storage, this car supposedly sat by itself. No online records, no Instagram hints, no trace in official papers. It's whispers among close friends and rumors in the car world. This wasn't Paul's style, they said. He loved sharing his passion. So, why the secrecy? Why would a man so open about his car guy life choose to hide this one build? Ideas swirled. Some thought it was a surprise for his daughter Meadow. Others guessed it was a personal tribute to his father, and some believed it was simply highscape. Car built with no sponsors, no fanfare, and no deadline. As years passed, even the biggest Walker fans had dismissed the ghost build as made-up legend. K-myth created by sadness and guessing. After all, everything else he owned had been listed, sold, or displayed. If there was a secret car, why hadn't it come up? The answer wouldn't come until years later when one garage hidden on the edge of Santa Clarita was finally unlocked. After Paul's tragic death in 2013, much of his car legacy was quickly organized and put into public view. The auction house Barrett Jackson eventually handled the high-profile sale of dozens of his vehicles. And fans looked through listings, trying to spot movie cars, dream builds, and rare imports. But what Monty didn't realize was that there were other places beyond the main collection. Smaller, more private space. Small used not as showrooms, but as safe havens. one garage set behind a plain industrial. Building remained sealed for almost 5 years after his death. It was listed under a private company tied to one of his side businesses, and few people even knew it existed. Neighbors said the unit had been quiet for years, the occasional light turning on late at night before going dark again. It wasn't until Paul's estate went through final legal proceedings that the existence of this mysterious garage came to light, when family and trusted friends finally appended it. They expected maybe a part stash or an extra project he'd given up on. What they found instead shocked even those who knew Paul best. Covered in dust and tucked under a heavy cover was a stripped-down Datsun 240 shell. Bare metal, no paint, with racing harnesses and a custom-made roll cage. Engine mounts hinted at a much power source than the body suggested. Stacks of vintage Japanese parts, notebooks, and hand-labeled boxes filled the space. This wasn't an abandoned shell. This was a personal dream coming to life, slowly in silence. No Ven records tied the car to his main collection. No photos existed of him working on it. This was something different, something Paul kept to himself. Under that dust-covered tarp was more than just a car. It was a mystery wrapped in steel and feelings. Theshel was confirmed to be a 1973 Datsun 240Z, but wasn't close to original. The firewall had been custom cut. 2 black mounts suggested Paul was changing body to fit a modern engine. It's likely a twin-turbo V6 from the Nissan VR series. Several boxes contained original parts from the GTR lineup. It's computers, turbos, fuel systems, carefully belled and preserved. In the corner-off garage sat a set of custom wheels, handmade carbon fiber panels, and a full analog gauge cluster. No digital screens, no touch controls. Everything pointed to a pure drive-in experience. Lightweight, mechanical, raw. On the workbench, there were blue aprons and hand-drawn sketches. Written in Sharpie were notes that read, "Keep weight low, all function, old soul." Modern muscle. But what shook the group the most was what they found in the glove box of the half-built car. A worn leather notebook, stuffed with tuning notes, parts lists, and loose Polaroids. Inside, in Paul's size height to recognize handwriting, were thoughts and ideas about the build. One gearhead, do it the way Dad would have tonight. No corners cut. Another simply said, this one's just for me. No sponsors, no deadlines, no Hollywood polish, just passion. Whatever this car was meant to be, tribute, therapy, or thrill. It was clear Paul had poured himself into it, and it never once appeared on a red carpet or social feed. It was his alone, and now it told a story he never got to finish. One of the strangest parts about finding the hidden 240Z build was how little paperwork there was. Paul Walker was known for his careful attention to detail. His other vehicles, whether Skyline GTRs or rare Mustangs, were logged, insured, and stored with full records. But this car, no title, no VN in the DMV database, no previous owner history, no mention on forums, registration forms, or in Walker's known car records. It was, in every official sense, a ghost. That silence raised serious questions. How did Paul get a shell with no paperwork trail? How long had it been in his possession? No, he had no one in his inner circle ever mentioned it. Some close friends guessed that the Datsun had been bought under a different company to keep it off the books. Others believe it was gotten through a private connection and meant to stay off the grid. Bide sign. Not for hiding, just for peace. Making things more confusing were the parts scattered around the shop. The VR38 engine parts matching the power source of the Nissan GTR didn't line up with any known builds he was working on publicly. A unique intake part hinted at custom tuning. A modified frame suggested the car was being set up for serious track use. Yet no one had a build sheet, no tuning plan, no publicized goal. One handwritten note tucked inside a notebook simply read, "Mechanical feel, all analog, no screens, no apps, no noise, just car." Some fans believe it was a retirement car, the build he planned to finish when Fast and Furious ended. Others claim it was for his daughter Meadow, perhaps adjunct, perhaps a lesson. A few even think it was a tribute to his father, built-in hainer of the first car Paul ever fell in love with. Without a spec sheet, no one can say for sure. But that silence only made the mystery deeper. It's in a world where celebrities show off every detail. Paul's key craftsmanship stands in stark contrast and makes the build all theme more powerful. As more details came out about the hidden 240s, guessing got stronger about its purpose. Why was Paul Walker, a man with access to any exotic in the world, spending so much time on a modest Japanese coupe from the early 1970s? What made this car different from his twin-turbo Supras, his fleet of GTRs, his perfectly kept BMW M1S? Those close to Paul say the Datsun 240 zilled a special place in his heart, not for its value, but for its soul. One of the cars that sparked his love off driving in the first place? His father, Paul Walker III, a former sewer contractor and self-proclaimed car guy, raised Paul around old-school American and Japanese machines. They bonded over working on beat-up imports. The Z represented that time. Lightweight, manual, no electronics, just pure connection between driver and road. Some believe Paul chose the 240Z for exactly that reason. It was a blank canvas for something deeper, a tribute to his dad, a love letter to his roots, the kind of car that didn't need a red carpet or a YouTube channel to matter. Inside the leather-bound notebook found with Thacker, one entry stood out: build it like I'm 17 again. No money, just dreams, non-was, just feel. Keep it raw. And if they're not, read simply. Pops would have loved this one. It wasn't just the car that made this story powerful. It was their asin. This wasn't a vanity build. It was personal, emotional, and heartbreakingly incomplete. Those close to Paul have never confirmed full story, but the clues are hard to ignore. In a world of loud cars and louder fame, Paul chose silence for the Sony. That alone says everything. As the TM looked through the garage in 2 weeks following the discovery, it became clear Paul had left more than just blueprints. Attila Futes, ideas, reminders, raw inspiration scattered throughout the workspace. Inside a drawer of a rusted tooled chestware, dozens of folded-up sticky notes, receipts from parts orders, and handwritten shopping lists. Some wear a technical, shortened driveshaft, R32 brakes won't fit. Try 300 Zax, thin Nabies, master cylinder. Others were surprisingly thoughtful. One note read, driving isn't a boot speed, it's about clarity. Anotherpin to the wall above a workbench shade. This one's just for me. Don't show anyone until it's done? Perhaps the most emotional entry of all was scribbled on the back of a parts catalog. Build the car the world doesn't expect from me. It was a motto that echoed Trust the Garage, because Paul wasn't interested in building another Instagram legend. He wanted something with meaning. The parts choices confirmed it. Retro analog gauges, a lightweight clutch, no power steering, and a MoMA steering wheel. Straight out of the 80s, everything screamed connection, feedback, simplicity. The deeper they dug, the more it became clear this wasn't a fast build. It wasn't built towing shows or lap times. It was an emotional outlet, one he'd tinker with between movie shoots, early in the morning, or late at night when the world went quiet. He may not have finished it, but he left behind a blueprint of his mindset, of a man who, after years in the spotlight, found peace in a forgotten shell of a car and wanted to turn it into something that reminded him he fell in love with driving in the first place. Despite the passion, por dentro, Paul Walker's secret Datsun 240Z project was never completed. When people first learned about the car tucked away in that small dust cove edgeridge, one question echoed louder than the rest. Why didn't he finish it? To understand that, you have to look at Paul's final years, between 2011 and 2013. Paul was at the peak of both fame and personal change. He was filming Fast and Furious 6 and 7, traveling for charity work, raising his daughter Meadow full-time, and launching his non-profit organization, Reach Out Worldwide. He was also an active racer, participating in endurance events and car shows, not as a celebrity, but as a passionate driver. His secret build was never part of his brand. That was that point. It wasn't for Barrett Jackson. It wasn't for Instagram. It wasn't even fourth Fast franchise. It was for him. And as life sped up around him, the car became his quiet refuge, something he'd return to in stolen hours. A few friends, Remembered him saying, "When I finish this one, you'll understand what Ty was really about." But Ty Massaways had other plans. When Paul died in that tragic crash in November 2013, the world mourned the loss of a star. But in that quiet garage, a different kind of loss happened. The Project Theon, untouched by fame, untouched by Hollywood, was frozen in time. A wrench still rested on the engine cradle. Notapod was left open to a to-do list. The tires were aired, and never mounted. It looked like Paul had planned Toratorn maybe the very next day. That's what makes this car different. Most Office collection was curated. But this car, this was being built not for any O'Neills, but as a statement, not of power or speed, but of passion and purity. And no, it sits unfinished. A raw reminder thought even the brightest lives can leave behind pieces of a dream waiting for Somayon. To understand what they meant, Paul Walker's garage was filled with exotic metal. There were million-dollar Porsches, rare M3S, imported JDM legends like the R34 Skyline GTR. His collection, when listed after his death, drew headlines and auction frenzy. But ask Kanyon, who's seen the hidden 240's project, and they'll tell you it stands apart. Why? Because this was the only car in his collection that wasn't being shown off. It wasn't restored for investment. It wasn't prepped for media shoots or charity displays. It wasn't even listed in any inventory. This car wasn't curated. It was loved. This build wasn't loud. It was honest. It represented everything Paul loved about driving, stripped to its essence: manual steering. No electronics, all feel. It was the spiritual opposite oft. Flashy muscle and tech-heavy monsters he'd collected elsewhere. But more than that, its projector reviled Paul's heart. His notes showed intention. Its parts choices showed taste. His secrecy showed humility. Hadn't want this build judged, monetized, or altered. He wanted it to breathe. A former friend once remarked, this wasn't Paul Walker, the actor, building a car. It was Paul Walker Thecht, alone in the garage with a dream, the same way we all start. The hidden 240's isn't valuable because of what itis. It's valuable because of who it was for. It may never fetch headlines at auction. It may never be finished exically. How Paul envisioned it, but taught hose, who've seen it. It's the most real car in his collection, the most him. And maybe that's the car that matters most. In the years since Paul Walker's passing, tributes have poured in from across the globe. His Fast and Furusco stars honor him at every premiere. His daughter Meadow keeps his foundation alive. His fans drive skylines in his name, scream one last ride, and keep his legacy burning on pavement everywhere. But inside that little garage, far from cameras and crowds, rests perhaps the most authentic legacy of all. A car had never finished, but one that captured everything he stood for. This Datsun 240's isn't flashy. It's not famous. Don't have a movie credit or a stunt sequence. What it does have is something rarer: truth. It holds Paul's fingerprints, his scribbled notes, his vision. It reflects his roots. Cars built not for fame, but for feel. Engines built not for sponsorships, but for soul. In the end, Paul Walker's Secret Project tells us more about the man than any Hollywood feature ever cowed. Because that car, unfinished and unseen, was him stripped of roles, stripped of red carpets, stripped office cars and faster lines. It was Paul Walker, the quiet builder, the thinker, the dreamer. And that's why this garage, this project, this story matters, not because of what it's worth, but because of what it reveals. This movie is how does a hero